Thank you all for joining us for a discussion of nutrition in adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Thank you also to the American Academy of Developmental Medicine and Dentistry for hosting this webinar, and to Dr. Grant Turek and Dr. Seth Keller for the kind invitation to participate. My name is Dr. Mackenzie Cervenka, and I am Professor of Neurology at Johns Hopkins Medicine with subspecialty training in epilepsy. I am Medical Director of the Johns Hopkins Adult Epilepsy Diet Center and the Johns Hopkins Adult Epilepsy Monitoring Unit. My clinical and research interests focus on the management of adults with epilepsy and other neurologic disorders using ketogenic diet therapies. I will serve as moderator today, and the format of the session will include a case presentation, followed by a patient and mother's perspective, and concluding with a lecture on the importance of nutrition in the management of adults with IDD. Please type questions into the chat or unmute yourself and ask them at the end of the presentation. I would first like to introduce Dr. Anna Patnaik, who is a third-year neurology resident at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. She received her undergraduate degrees in psychology and biology at the University of Maryland, College Park, and she attended medical school at the University of Maryland. She plans to pursue a fellowship in epilepsy and will begin the session with a case presentation. Thank you, Dr. Patnaik.
Hello, thank you, Dr. Cervenka, for that introduction, and thank you for having me today. Let me just momentarily share my presentation. All right, so as Dr. Cervenka said, I'll be going through a case presentation for the next several minutes of a patient who you'll meet momentarily, whose name is Macie Steele. So Macie's currently 25 years old, but if we backtrack into her history from a clinical and medical perspective, her mom will tell you that birth-wise and through her pregnancy, it was quite unremarkable and she was developing normally. In her first trimester, she had a little bit of morning sickness, and in her third trimester, she underwent a minor surgical procedure, but otherwise in utero, Macie was developing normally. She was born at 41 weeks by C-section due to a nuchal cord, but spent no time in the NICU and went home and seemed to have met all of her developmental milestones up until she was 1 year old. During that time, she was breastfed, and then when it was getting to her first birthday, her family weaned her from breastfeeding to formula. And it was around that time of 1 year old that her family started to notice that she was having these episodes of eye rolling and quick body jerks. That these episodes started to increase in frequency, especially throughout the day when she appeared to be tired or hungry. And eventually these episodes of body jerking were then accompanied by prolonged episodes of staring spells. She was diagnosed with these episodes being seizures, and she eventually got to the point where she was having hundreds of these seizures daily and was diagnosed with a generalized epilepsy disorder. So when she was diagnosed with epilepsy, at around 2 years old, she was trialed on several different anti-seizure medications, all without improvement in her seizure frequency and her seizure burden during that time. At around 4 years old is when she started on the ketogenic diet. And that was the first time that Macie and her family started to notice that she was having a decrease in her seizure frequency to the point where she was actually seizure-free for 3 years while on the diet. In addition to that, her family noticed other effects from the ketogenic diet, including that she seemed to have increased energy and stamina throughout the day, and that some of her other impairments, including her fine motor coordination and her balance and her speech fluency, also had improved during that time on the ketogenic diet. So she continued on the ketogenic diet for several years, but after when she turned around 7 years old is when her seizures came back and her frequency of seizures started to increase again. This time not only with these jerking episodes and with the staring spells, but she also has generalized tonic-clonic seizures and tonic episodes as well. At this point, she was weaned from the ketogenic diet, and she was given a diagnosis of a couple of different refractory pediatric epilepsy disorders, such as Doucet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. With these new diagnoses of refractory epilepsy, she was trialed again on several different anti-seizure medications, again, without any improvement in her seizure burden. At 10 years old, she had a vagus nerve stimulator placed that again showed no difference in her seizure frequency or seizure burden. Looking at the other symptoms that she was having up until this time, her family noticed that in addition to seizures, that she had elements of movement disorder as well, that her gait would sometimes be ataxic, that she would have spasticity building in her muscles. And at the end of a long day, they noticed that some of her muscle fatigue was accompanied by tremors. She developed episodes of back pain that were thought to be consistent with a dystonia. Macie additionally had some cognitive delay and required special education throughout her time in public school, and eventually was homeschooled when her symptoms worsened. In addition to that cognitive delay, they noticed elements of fine motor delay as well, impairments in her speech fluency, and issues with her gross coordination and with her balance, again, possibly secondary to some of the ataxia. So she required some therapy services as well throughout her childhood. But this constellation of a seizure disorder, in addition to a movement disorder and developmental delay, is what led her family to stumble upon Glut1 deficiency syndrome. And so they went to a center and got her tested genetically for the SLC2A1 gene. And it was noted that Macie had a missense mutation that led her to have Glut1 deficiency syndrome. This is a little digression, but is what's amazing about genetic disorders is it's this one nucleotide change can lead to this change in amino acid, the protein structure, and eventually to this entire genetic syndrome. So her entire family got tested for this mutation. And all of them were negative, which interestingly, Macie's younger sister also has a history of seizures, but was negative for this missense mutation. The diagnosis was then further confirmed with a PET scan, as well as fasting EEG. And so now with this confirmed diagnosis of Glut1 deficiency syndrome, Macie was then retried on the ketogenic diet, at first with a modified Atkins diet, but then to a classic ketogenic diet again. And all of that, she again saw improvement in her seizures. When she hit puberty, there was some difficulty in maintaining ketosis, and she went through a clinical trial with a triheptanoid oil or C7 oil that didn't have any improvement. But after she got through the hump of puberty and adolescence, again, they saw benefit with the ketogenic diet. In addition to the ketogenic diet, she was also started on other medications, acetazolamide, which was actually initiated before she retried the ketogenic diet, which her family noted did have some improvement in her seizure frequency, especially with the tonic-clonic and tonic episodes that she was having. She's recently started on glucosamine and potassium supplements. And then she, 3 years ago, started on metformin, which has been helping with her episodes of dystonia. And now that she's an adult, she actually transitioned at 16 years old off of the ketogenic diet to a regular diet, still maintaining cessation of the tonic-clonic seizures and the generalized tonic-clonic seizures. She still has some episodes of staring spells with the myoclonic jerking for 2 to 3 seconds, but still overall an improvement from when she was a child. All right, and I'll turn it over there back to Dr. Cervenka and to Ms. Steele.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patnaik. That was a fantastic case presentation. For audience members who are not familiar with glucose transporter type 1 or Glut1 deficiency syndrome, this is a syndrome caused by a pathogenic variant, as Dr. Patnaik said, in the SLC2A1 gene, which results in the inability to effectively transport glucose across the blood-brain barrier to fuel the brain. This can result in abnormal eye movements and seizures beginning in early life, developmental delay, and movement disorders, among other neurologic symptoms that you heard about for Macie. The standard of care management, once diagnosed, is a ketogenic diet, which is a high-fat diet that produces ketone bodies, which can provide an alternate fuel source for the brain. However, other strategies, as you heard, are also being actively investigated for managing the symptoms of Glut1 deficiency syndrome. It is now my pleasure to introduce Macie Steele, who you've just heard about in this case presentation, as well as her mother, Glenna Steele. As you heard, Macie Steele is now 25 years old and was diagnosed with Glut1 deficiency syndrome at age 10 years. She lives in Owensville, Kentucky, with her parents, her sister, and her beloved pets. Macie volunteers regularly in a second grade classroom at Mapletown Elementary School and enjoys music, camping, and going to the lake with her family. Glenna Steele was the founding board member and is currently the executive director of the Glut Deficiency Foundation. She holds a Bachelor of Science and Master of Education degree from Eastern Kentucky University, and she spent 15 years teaching public school, kindergarten, and first grade in Florida and Kentucky. She has been a volunteer with the Epilepsy Foundation and of Kentuckiana and Kentucky Special Olympics, and currently lives in Owensville, Kentucky, with her husband, John, and her daughters, Macie and Maggie. First, I'd like to hear from Macie and Glenna about themselves and their personal journey with Glut deficiency syndrome.
Hi, it's we're glad to talk with all you all today, and glad to meet you all today. I'm like she said, I'm 25, and we live in Owensville, Kentucky, and I started on the diet when I was 4. But my seizures are getting better now to the metformin, and so we're yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about?
Oh, yeah. Maggie, she her seizures are better too, and we're glad about that. But she has the Grand 2A variant, they think, and hers is not related to it. We have 3 cats and a dog and 3 horses. And yeah.
Well, you might see one of our cats too in just a moment. He's on the couch back there. He may make an appearance, so we're sorry about that. But I'm Glenna. I'm Macie's mom. We shared a lot about, Dr. Cervenka did already a little bit about my background and history, but we're one of the founding board members of the Glut Deficiency Foundation. As you heard, Macie had quite a journey to get to her proper diagnosis that she did have epilepsy, but we always wondered about the root cause. And when we finally found out, one of our goals was to try to help other families from having to go through the long journey that we had to go through. And, the what ifs, and wondering if she'd gotten the diagnosis much earlier, or if she'd started the diet much earlier, would the outcomes be different for her? So that's kind of explains my career shift and why I'm doing what I'm doing today. But we're very thankful for the opportunity to talk to all of you all about Glut deficiency, and maybe you can help find some patients out there too who need their diagnosis as well.
Well, thank you both. That is fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like being on a ketogenic diet?
It was hard because I had it was hard because I had eat certain things at certain times, and I knew it was and I got frustrated with it sometimes. Like I knew I had to eat what certain things, but I didn't. It got I had to
What you want to say, it's okay.
And I had a and it made me feel kind of like I understood too that I had to take certain things, snacks places too, but like we missed out on a bunch of stuff like eating in certain restaurants, and I didn't get to eat certain foods like the rest of my family was eating, and it made me kind of feel left out too. So.
And we turned to the diet when Macie was 4, and that was, well before her GLUT1 deficiency diagnosis at age 10. And that was because the medications weren't working. But I had to do the research. I had to search out the diet. I had to be the advocate. Nobody ever offered it to us. And the first doctor that we asked about it, he said, "Oh, it's too hard and it's not going to work." And we had to really be advocates to get her the chance to try it, and end up traveling, quite a distance from her home to get her to do it. So we were the driving force behind her, really begging for her to be able to try it. After I had learned about the diet at the presentation from the Charlie Foundation about the time she was diagnosed. So she went from having, mentioned hundreds of these little brief seizures a day to 0 the day she got into ketosis, the second day of the diet. So it was like, magic almost. And when the seizures were better, everything was better. Her coordination was better, her attention was better, her focus, her, mood, she was happy, we were happy. It was just really like this fog had been lifted, and this little girl, this kind of a new little girl, was underneath that we hadn't seen for some time. And even more important, I think, was pardon me, she was able to come off of some of the medications that she'd been on too that weren't helping, really slowing down her brain processing and changing her behaviors and her mood. So it was just such a real blessing for our family to be able to stumble on this and get her to be able to try it. And also, I always like to mention too that, watching your child have all these struggles, it's such a feeling of helplessness, and, you're at somebody else's mercy to tell you what medication to take next, or, you just don't know what to do or who to listen to. But it was so empowering to be able, with my own hands, to make her foods myself and kind of be responsible for, with the help of others, of course, but, to have some control over what life was like for her. So, we just have such an affinity for the diet, and I'm always so thankful for it. But we always kind of try to say too, it's a little bit of a love-hate relationship as well. It's not always easy. We live in a rural area, and like I mentioned, we had to really work hard to get access to care, and finding a place and a dietitian that would offer the services. And it did take a lot of time and organization and planning. And in many ways, it was really pretty isolating, not just for Macie, but for our family as well. So much in our society revolves around food, social aspects, family have huge families, and, not being able to participate in a typical way, still in a good way though we could, but we found a lot of workarounds. But, it can be very isolating, and Macie's 25 now. So when she was 4, that's 21 years ago, and a lot has changed about ketogenic diet therapy since then. But in those days, a lot of people had never even heard of it. I remember her aide at school saying that, there was no shame in her having epilepsy, but the shame was in not treating it. And they thought we weren't treating it because she wasn't on medication. So a lot has changed, thankfully, since then. But the challenges absolutely were outweighed by all the benefits that she experienced. And we're very thankful that she did go on it when she did.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That just puts everything into tremendous perspective. What would you, what advice might you have for other individuals, other patients who are thinking about starting a therapeutic diet, or that has been recommended to them after the journey that you have been through? Or is there advice that you might have about how to make that a smooth transition?
Do you have any advice for somebody getting ready to start a diet?
I would say, try to try to ask people that's been on it before, like what it's like for them, and then try to like get all the like resources and everything to know what you're gonna have to do before that.
Yeah, and I think talking to other people who've done it and been there, finding that community, other parents. I think I've always learned more from other parents than I have from, our medical teams, especially people that have done it before, finding I think, and no offense to all the wonderful neurologists I know who are watching, but, the dietitian is so key for successful implementation of the diet, and just finding one that's, willing to think outside the box and really try to personalize things for the individual family too. And, in our community, it is the standard of care. And I know a lot of families early on, especially, the whole family will change the way they're eating to really try to make it easier for the patient, so they feel like they're not missing out on so much. And I know Dr. Cervenka has, I've done keto, the ketogenic diet, and, you can really empathize when you've done it, what it's like for the patient to do that, and how it changes how you feel. And, so I would recommend probably doing all those things. And there's some wonderful books online too, lots of recipe books. There's so many resources now, just keeping in mind that it is a medical diet, and a lot of what you find online isn't exactly a good fit, but a lot of times you can tailor what you do find to fit, under that guidance of your dietitian, for sure. That's just so key.
Fantastic. So now that you're off of the diet, Macie, how do you feel? It sounded like the symptoms that you were having, fortunately, have not come back since being off the diet. And would you ever consider revisiting it in the future?
Well, I'm really glad to be off the diet, because when I first got off it, after we went for the appointment in Texas and stayed off it for a little while, I was like, I ate these new, well, they weren't really new, but like foods I haven't eaten before, and I was just like kind of relieved, and I got to try a whole bunch of things that I didn't eat before, and I was glad that I didn't have to worry about it affecting me, and I was also glad that that I could just take a break from like the keto, because it did help for a while, but then it got to where it wasn't helping too, because I think that's the way it was, that some things are kind of lost its like thing. And I don't think I would go back on the diet again. Mom's tried to try to get me to go back on the diet again, but I was like, I told her there's no way I'll ever do that again, because like it was like torture trying to like, I understand I had to be on it and I had to do that stuff, but like living it every day, it was like torture putting up through it. And
well, I think Macie's opinion of that, for us, it was a unique circumstance, maybe not as unique as we understood at the time, but where the diet did lose its effectiveness with her, and trying to make that decision was a hard one. coming off the diet, we knew with the diagnosis, this is what she was supposed to do. You know, in my role, I teach families about that all the time. This is the standard of care, but, you know, we just we're having a lot of problems getting her ketone levels where they needed to be and maintaining them for therapeutic levels, and just weren't really seeing the benefits. And she, you know, was becoming more independent and more vocal about her objections to the diet. She had been homeschooled for quite some time and went back to public school in the 8th grade, and, you know, just started to really experience a lot of the peer pressures that go along with it. And, you know, the challenges of taking her food to school. She said she felt like people looked at her, and, you know, it's difficult.
Kind of judged me too,
because of what you were eating.
Yeah.
And, you know, the symptoms of the disease are isolate them enough, you know, really, and make them feel different. And then you add on, you know, a layer of special diet and missing out on things on top. And I will say, her being able to be off the diet, I think initially there was some improvement just because the ketones weren't where they needed to be, and we were still restricting carbs, trying to keep the ketones up. So she was kind of in this area of bouncing back and forth between, you know, glucose fueled by glucose or fueled by ketones, and just there really wasn't ever enough of either one of the fuel sources. So for her, even though she's not on the ketogenic diet, food is still critically important for her, and good nutrition. Also, we still have a lot of considerations. You know, she eats very frequently to keep the glucose levels as stable as possible. You know, we try to encourage protein along with carbohydrates for staying power. She has to eat, you know, almost as soon as her feet hit the floor in the morning when she gets up, because she's been without food all through the night. So we've just found other ways to manage and keep, you know, the same level of benefits that we felt like she was having later on. You know, we came off the diet the first time before the diagnosis because we were chasing that seizure freedom that came those first 3 years. You know, that was our measuring stick, because, you know, we wanted to get back to that. And you know, they kind of told us in the care, you know, well, you know, the next step, if you're not getting seizure freedom, you know, we have to go back to medications. And then we eventually did wean the diet, but went back on, you know, as Anna mentioned, when she was diagnosed. But making that decision, it was just really kind of all about, you know, the symptoms. And then as she was older, making the decision, even though we knew she had GLUT1 deficiency, to come off the diet, you know, as a parent, you just always, it's such a struggle to know when to say this is as good as it's going to get, and let's relax a little bit, or whether to keep pushing and pushing and pushing for more. And, you know, in hindsight, if we'd had diagnoses earlier, I would have understood a lot of the journey that she's been on better. And when you ask about being willing to do the diet again, that's my motivation for trying to do the diet again, is, you know, can we get, because I see patients in adulthood diagnosed with GLUT1 deficiency and start a diet in adulthood, and they see benefits. So, you know, that's where I come from when I ask every once in a while, hey, Macie, you know, would you like to try the diet again? And let's just see. And you know, the answer is the same. And she's old enough now and independent enough now. She has to cooperate. And if she's not willing to do that, it makes it harder. But I do wonder. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that was actually why I asked the question. I think, Macie, you are an adult, you are independent. So I think that is absolutely important and essential for thinking about nutrition and thinking about therapeutic diets in general. And so with that, I want to just thank you so much for sharing your experience, Macie and Glenna. There are definitely questions in the chat that are specifically for you guys. So we will circle back to those at the end, because it sounds like the audience would really love to learn some more about your journey. I think also this really highlights a dramatic example of how nutrition can impact neurologic disease in an adult with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So thank you so much for sharing. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Janice Goldschmidt. She received her master's degree in nutrition and food sciences, as well as a master's in public health from the University of Maryland, College Park. She is actively involved as both a researcher and practitioner in the nutritional status of individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities, and has published and presented on this topic in numerous professional publications and conferences. In 2018, the American Association of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, or the AAIDD, published her first book entitled Teaching Authentic Cooking Skills to Adults with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, Active Engagement. Janice is currently serving as the Director of Nutrition Services at Community Support Services Incorporated in Gaithersburg, Maryland, where she is responsible for developmental programs intended to support the health and wellness of adults with autism through nutrition-related programming. Thank you so much, and we're so happy to have you.
Thank you, Dr. Cervenka. Let me pull up my slides here. It's a pleasure to be here. Okay. And let me get slideshow. Okay. All right. Anna, can you see those? Thumbs up. Great, thank you. All right, I am Janice Goldschmidt. I am a registered dietitian, and I'm also a public health scientist. I have worked most of my career in working with adults with autism and IDD. And specifically on the nutrition aspects. And today I've been tasked with giving you a whirlwind tour. We're going to talk more generally, pulling out from Glut 1 to more generally basically the nutritional status of adults with ASD and IDD. And I've been asked to also include some programming at my center on how we address these very specific nutrition-related concerns. So what I'd like to start with first is some background on the topic of health trends and what we know. You're more aware than most audiences that I address about the trends, but one of the biggest concerns that we see in understanding sort of the epidemiological picture is a phenomenon called diagnostic overshadowing. And again, you understand diagnostic overshadowing more than most, but it's basically underdiagnosis. We see a huge trend where healthcare providers, healthcare professionals don't like to diagnose secondary conditions in this population. It's a very widespread phenomenon in ASD, in IDD, and of course in mental health disorders. It has a profound consequence on our understanding as well. And you'll see this problem come up over and over and over in the presentation today. This is a topic I'm often asked to discuss, the role of diagnostic overshadowing, so I could talk for several hours. But basically, I think there are three factors. It plays out in many different ways when we're looking at the healthcare, but it comes down to three basic sort of reasons why. One is, of course, the nature of ASD and IDD and how these individuals often cannot present as typical patients would. In your training, you know how you're asked an individual questions about their status. And from the answers, you determine what the signs and symptoms are and how to go forward. But of course, many individuals, most of my clients, 40% are nonverbal, 15% are minimally verbal, and none of my clients could tell you the status of their body as you would understand it from your classical medical school training. So that's one of the biggest aspects, I think, that contributes to underdiagnosis. We also have the fragmented healthcare system. So many of our adults with these conditions are on heavy-duty antipsychotics. And of course, your prescribing physician and your PCP, who's responsible for the metabolic consequences of these medications, often aren't communicating at all. So that kind of problem is also contributing to the underdiagnosis. And then, of course, the clinician or researcher who often aren't trained. They aren't trained to understand how these individuals will present, things like that, of how for example, one of the biggest things we look for is changes in behavior. Change in behavior, as we understand it, of course, is that it could be a health problem. But unless you are trained to look for that, you may see these behaviors as just idiosyncratic. In our facility, we call it the bleeding out the eyes phenomena. If a client comes in to a doctor and they're bleeding out the eyes, they'll treat what they see, but they don't go looking oftentimes. And of course, you're specialized, so you know about this more than others. However, this phenomenon really does have a profound impact on how we understand their health. So let's talk about what we know about the health. We do know that they often do not receive the recommended preventive care. I'm going to cite a bunch of studies here that I'm going to breezing through this, again, a big overview, and that they have tremendous barriers to appropriate healthcare in both Canada and the United States. And they have very unique healthcare risks. And one of the biggest healthcare risks is that they have a tremendous comorbidity burden. This is a very nice study from Kaiser Permanente, Northern California. It's a 1,500 individuals with ASD, age and gender matched against controls. And what we find from this study is every single physical and mental health condition that they looked at, these individuals had higher rates. Okay. And of course, if you're considering that there's diagnostic overshadowing going on, it's probably the rates are depressed, meaning that they probably don't have all their diagnoses there. But the picture very clearly indicates that they have a huge secondary condition rates of secondary conditions. So mental health conditions are higher, depression, OCD, anxiety, and almost every single physical ailment they looked at. Now, there were some exceptions. One was substance abuse, and here you have an access issue because my individuals, who are quite impaired, don't have access to heroin or liquor. And the other one was sexually transmitted diseases. And again, especially for autism, where you have that social impairment, that's where it's going to be effective. But all of the others, we're going to see much higher rates. And one of the biggest is obesity and the downstream problems of obesity, all of the metabolic syndrome leading to diabetes, leading to cardiovascular disease. Again, another topic I could go into at length, but I'm breezing through it. So we have a huge secondary comorbidity burden of secondary conditions. This, of course, we have a higher mortality rate. It's generally elevated for those with ASD and IDD over the general population. A very large Swedish study found it was elevated for every age cohort, and that was regardless of gender and regardless of level of ability. And the single biggest risk factor for early mortality is comorbid epilepsy, which is believed to be, especially for autism, the most common comorbid form of IDD. So we have such high rates of epilepsy for autism. That is a very significant risk factor for early mortality. On the positive side, newer studies from Canada show that the mortality rates are falling. They're starting to normalize now. And as we get them to age longer, we're finding that they're having more of the types of conditions you would see with the aging, with the increase of lifespan, including cardiovascular disease and obesity leading to health problems like metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, as well as certain types of cancer. Okay, so as a registered dietitian, I must take a moment to talk about a nutrition-related health factor that contributes significantly to the epidemiological problems, as well as quality of life, and that is disordered eating. Autism particularly is a condition of atypical sensory processing. And if you think about where all the sense systems intersect, it's food, right? It affects, our sense systems have all these different relationships with sensory processing. And of course, these individuals have varying sensory problems across different modalities. So when you have atypical sensory processing, you will have disordered eating. And we don't say eating disorder because for two reasons, one of which is diagnostic overshadowing. I have never in my career, with a few exceptions, seen an eating disorder diagnosed as a secondary condition for those with ASD and IDD. But also because the way the DSM is written, it often precludes a diagnosis. It has it designed in a way that doesn't allow for a diagnosis. And we'll see that in a minute when we talk about one of our categories here. So let's look at these. I have divided, this is from an article I wrote looking at disordered eating on the autism spectrum. And to make sense of these behaviors, I've divided them into 4 categories. And the first one is food rigidity. And this is, of course, the behavior rigidity you see in autism spelled out in food. I interviewed for my master's thesis the parents of adult children with autism, and they would describe what their kids would eat growing up. And it was 3 foods, typically 3 to 4. And it wasn't peas and carrots, right? It's energy dense, highly processed foods typically. This is going to look a lot like ARFID from the DSM, which is a new diagnosis related to restrictive eating. I have never seen a diagnosis of ARFID, even though this type of behavior is very common, especially in the childhood years. It does give way a bit in the adult years, but you'll see it routinely in children with ASD and IDD. The second category of disordered eating are the very high-risk behaviors, life-threatening behaviors. I'm only addressing two here today. One is rumination, the recyclic swallowing and regurgitation of a bolus of food. Oftentimes they'll do it for hours, regurgitate in the ball, then swallow, regurgitate, swallow. Sometimes they spit it out. Sometimes they finally will swallow and keep it down. It's very a great risk because, of course, the aspiration concerns, but also because of the strong acids harming the esophagus and throat. So rumination is one. The other one is pica, which is the eating of non-nutritive substances. And in the general population, we're relatively aware of pica as a behavior for pregnant women who often eat clay, dirt. It's a sanctioned activity in some parts culturally or geographically. In the South, they'll sometimes eat clay. And then dementia clients or children with sickle cell anemia and various things like that will participate. But in the general population, it's a discriminate behavior, meaning individuals are eating one type of non-nutritive substance. But for those with ASD and IDD, it's an indiscriminate behavior, meaning if they are displaying pica behavior, they're eating anything they can get their hands on. It's an opportunity. And everything you see in this list was taken from a peer-reviewed journal that I found. And some of these are horrifying, and some of them are life-threatening. And you can see how an individual who has pica behavior is going to need tremendous resources to keep them safe and likely limit their ability to go into the community because of that. And so the third category of disordered eating, I will argue, is sensory-based. And this makes perfect sense if you have atypical sensory processing, and it's going to be across multiple modalities and topographies, and you're going to have your own unique idiosyncratic ideas about what is appropriate or not based on your sense system. And so you're going to see just every parent will have their own horror stories. They'll only eat this color or that color, or won't eat this color and that color together, or this temperature or that temperature or together, or lots and lots of texture aversions. And for a while, one of my favorite things to do was to read the memoirs, autobiographies of individuals, high-functioning autistic individuals with autism, writing about their life, and many of them would discuss food. And I'll never forget, one of them wrote about when they were a child, a cherry tomato burst in his mouth, and it was the most repulsive thing he'd ever experienced. And it was a decade before he was willing to try it again. But because of the sense sensations that it evoked in him, it was just, and I was brought to awareness of how, food and taste are so different in someone with that atypical sensory processing. The last category, see where I am? Good, is going to be binge eating. And I'm going to argue here that you'll see a lot of binge eating, particularly manifested in rapid eating in the adult years. It is ubiquitous here. We have it everywhere we go. And of course, binge eating disorder is the newest and most commonly diagnosed eating disorder based on the DSM. And this is a good example here of where the DSM itself is going to preclude diagnosis. Now, if you look at the left column, you'll see the criteria for binge eating disorder. You have to have any 3 of these 5 to get a diagnosis. But look how subjective they are. The client would have to tell you they're uncomfortably full, or they eat when they're hungry, when they're even when they're full, or that they're disgusted or depressed, or they eat alone due to embarrassment. Those are all subjective states that for my clients, you couldn't get to. And so on the right, I made them objective. If you could adjust the DSM, which you can't, but if you could adjust it to make objective criteria, you could see how it would be possible to get to a diagnosis. And the consequence of this is that I have binge eating everywhere I look, but I have no diagnoses of binge eating. And if you don't have a diagnosis, you can't get to prevalence. And without prevalence, you can't get to all the things like funding and specialization and even treatment options. So it's a very complicated problem. All right, now I'm going to discuss, I've talked about the incredible secondary comorbidity burden, the eating disorder issues, disordered eating issues, obesity problems. Let's talk about some programming that we utilize where I am. I am the Director of Nutrition Services at Community Support Services. We're a large facility in Montgomery, Maryland. It says 60 residences, but we now have 61 plus a main campus in Gaithersburg, and as well as a commercial restaurant. So we're a large provider in Montgomery County, and all facilities tend to be county-based because of funding, but you guys are aware of that more than most. All of our programming is based on the active engagement model, which is a program developed here at CSS to draw individuals with cognitive and motor impairment into cooking safely. And so based on that model, it's part of the new movement in nutrition towards hands-on nutrition education, which is ideal, of course, for individuals with autism and IDD. So one of the things we do is we have a commercial restaurant, and all we do is produce meal kits. We send them out to our residences, and they are designed for the clients to prepare them, not the staff. And then to do that, we'll talk about some of the special materials. And of course, you're aware of meal kits. Everything's together, but they're ideal for teaching cooking skills. And they're also ideal for controlling the menu. We want to have a better, higher quality diet for our clients. So if you look on the right, you'll see a pictorial recipe. Most of my clients, some of them can decode text, but few can decode text into action, meaning follow text and then follow the instructions. But the picture-based recipe leads them through the recipe so that all they have to do is use the pictures as a cue to get through. And remember, everything is in the kit. So this meal kit program has really advanced both the quality of the diet of our clients, as well as their ability to participate in cooking safely. And here you're looking at a meal kit. We also follow up, of course, to find out how the meal kits are received. We do a lot of polling. We do some focus groups among staff and clients. We have a massive snacking program. One of the most important things we're trying to do is increase the fruit and vegetable consumption. Again, we have that dietary rigidity, and there's often a resistance. So we started a snacking program, and it has found major success. We just finished an audit, and in 1 week, we served 1,500 servings of fruits and vegetables. The formula for this program is unlimited fruits and vegetables, all you want. There's no cost. It's a community-wide program that's open to everybody, including staff. You can have all the fruits and vegetables you want. They're bagged, or 6 kinds of apples, oranges, grapes, and 6 kinds of vegetables. All you want, but you can only have one of our energy-dense items, and we offer tiny servings of peanut butter, ranch dressing, and then a fat-free yogurt. So that has been very successful in promoting fruit and vegetable consumption. A lot of modeling going on there, and we really feel it's the single best way to increase the consumption of vegetables, which is very important across a variety of nutritional metrics. We have a lot of vocational groups to support the snack zone in terms of packing vegetables. We use the labor of our clients to support the snack zone in prepping things and things like that. We have a nutrition education newsletter. It's an electronic newsletter, and it's designed for people who cannot decode text, who cannot read. Think about what nutrition education looks like. This is the latest issue. It's electronic, so you're just seeing screenshots. But notice all the articles are pictorial, or they're video, or they're auditory. You can click on, and the bottom one, the very lower right, is the menu for the week in the meal kits. You can see what we're serving, so they have it, see it coming. But you'll see that there's various, and all of the content is designed by our dietetic interns here at CSS. So we've advanced nutrition education. We have classes 3 times a week for nutrition education. Now, what does that look like for individuals with cognitive impairment? Well, we want to increase that food curiosity. They have that rigidity, and we want them to be, go crazy about all the foods in the world. So the idea is that we interns create an 8 to 12 minute video on a topic. On Mondays, it's any food topic, such as artichokes. On Tuesday, we talk about how food and science intersect, so how taste buds work. And on Fridays, we go on a food tour. We get out of the house, as we say, and go somewhere and learn about food in France, or food at the local grocery store, or the farmer's market. So that's an online platform, a Zoom platform, where clients are drawn into a discussion of food, and we're trying to increase their curiosity. Remember the meal kits? Well, we have cooking classes. You come from your own kitchen. You come in on the Zoom platform to one of our online classes, and we support you, me and my dietetic interns, we support the client through the production of that meal kit with lots of principles drawn from the active engagement curriculum. And so we're not only getting dinner on the table, we're supporting those important cooking skills. And studies have shown consistently that when you draw individuals into cooking their own meals, they become less passive and they have develop a better relationship with food, and certainly more curious and open to new. As I like to say, when you make it yourself, you're much more likely to eat it. We've also just started a research project in conjunction with the University of Maryland College Park. We're studying BMI versus waist circumference. We know we have an obesity problem, but it's been studied almost exclusively from the perspective of BMI. BMI distorts low muscle mass and high muscle mass. And we believe that the problem is camouflaged by BMI. And we believe that it will, our hypothesis is that our obesity, we have higher rates than we know. And a good example is that is even our individuals at normal weights are showing high visceral fat deposits. And we all know that that's the dangerous kind. When you have that fat around the middle, it is a contributing factor to metabolic syndrome. It's one of the criteria for it. So we've just started this project, and we are very anxious to see what the data shows. Lastly, I want to just say one thing about what we're doing about this disordered eating and the rapid eating. We're really hep on environmental controls to slow people down, because it's a natural way to bring people down rather than nagging. Slow down. Because everybody wants to take part in the joy and pleasure of food. So we develop a music for meals program, and every night at dinner time, the house residential staff will receive an email with 4 music options, and they're really slow music pieces, guitar, piano, orchestral, or sometimes even new age. And it's supposed to, when you listen to the music, it's beautiful, and it just slows your heart rate down naturally. And that in turn slows your rate of eating down naturally. So increasing the pleasure as well as the rate of eating. A lot of eating disorder clinics have been using music, and it requires very few resources or training. We're very big on that right now as a way to address the rapid eating concerns. And that brings me to the end. I think I came in on time. I did. So Dr. Cervenka, I'll turn it back to you.
That was absolutely fabulous. I learned so much from your talk. Thank you so much for sharing. That is just incredible work that you're doing, and please continue. That's wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Dr.
We have a lot of comments and questions in the chat, so thank you everyone for your participation. I want to start by just reading off a comment to Glenna and Macie. It says, it's such a difficult diet to stick to, especially when you were a child. Good for you, and congratulations for your achievements. So I wanted to share that for sure. The next question for Glenna and Macie is, did you experience pushback from teachers at school or family members and friends about the diet? And how did you address that?
Did your friends ever say anything to you about your diet or try to get you to eat things?
No. Well, I didn't hang out with a lot of people at school. It was mostly just I hung out mostly with my helper Michelle, which like she took me to class and all that, except we didn't hang out at lunch together. But I didn't like I was kind of like, again, even though there was a bunch of, even though I was around people, I was kind of isolated at school too, because I didn't have many friends at school. So no, but like when we was down at her house, she was, we were pretty good at eating stuff, but like she would like sometimes try to like give us stuff as a treat and all that. But her and our aunt Sherry, they were pretty good at knowing what to do too.
Yeah,
so.
we left a lot of, like, I would prepare meals if I had to be gone. You know, meals with little labels all over them, you know, when what to go with what meal. So we didn't have to have people help with meal prep that often, but I mentioned before, one of her teaching assistant in kindergarten was, you know, they all treated the diet, they didn't understand it. And to them, you know, it's the traditional thing of you take medicine when you need help with something. So they didn't understand that. And I think a lot of people thought she was just trying to eat healthy. I know once we let Macie go with some relatives of ours who were in visiting, and Macie was typically very good at saying, I'm on a special diet. I can't have that. That was kind of a badge of honor for her when she was younger. That's harder to do when you get older. You know, you're not as willing to do that. But one of the relatives, you know, gave her orange juice because she said, well, orange juice is healthy. You know, I thought this would be okay, which, you know, it's loaded in carbs and very anti-keto. So we had some situations like that. But for the most part, when you took the time to explain to somebody and trying to find words to use, I know a lot of people in the Glut community will use words like they're allergic to sugar and, you know, just trying to emphasize the importance, but, you know, that's not really accurate either. But just trying to get people to understand that, you know, even the smallest little bit of something they're not supposed to have or not finishing their complete meal, that's a real challenge in the school setting, I think, to explain. But yeah, for the most part, people were supportive that took the time to learn about it.
And my helper that I was talking about, that was Michelle. She was the one I had when I went back to 8th grade. And she was, even though she didn't like know a lot of stuff with the diet, we gave her a pamphlet, and like she was with me for a long time, so she got to know me better, and like she was pretty good at knowing stuff too.
Yeah, and having that person at school that kind of checks to see that meals are being eaten, and if there's a birthday party in the classroom, that there's something else to grab that they can have, you know, kind of being their advocate at school. That's real key too, I think, for managing the diet at school.
Great. I think the next question was, this might be for Glenna. Can you discuss the challenges with finding the items that you needed to prepare meals? Also, were both of your daughters on this diet?
Both my daughters were not on the diet. My youngest had febrile seizures and we did not think had any more for several years. So when Macie was on the diet, during the core period of time she was on the diet, my other daughter was not having seizures at the time. But finding ingredients and foods to prepare could be challenging because, you know, we had a meal planner that I learned to do myself, but I'm sorry, I keep having a tickle in my throat. It was difficult to find the brands that were specified at times, you know, where the calculations had been done. We did not have access to a lot of the medical foods. At the time, she wasn't even able to get any of them on prescription because she wasn't formula fed, you know, tube fed. So we weren't able to get some of the foods that are out there now that make things much easier for families to do the diet. Following a ketogenic diet is very expensive with the meats and cheeses, and we used a lot of heavy whipping cream. So, you know, that was another consideration too. There are ways to work around all those challenges. But yeah, like I said, we live in a rural area, and I made trips to Lexington many times to buy special ingredients that we could use in the diet, or eventually ordering things online. So that is a consideration for families, I think.
Excellent. And I can answer the next question. There's a question about if the Glut deficiency is a lifelong genetic disorder, and yes, it is. So because it's a pathogenic variant that is lifelong, and it says what metabolic changes indicate for returning to a regular diet. And so this is, I know, a fascinating question. There are researchers that are associated with the Glut Deficiency Foundation that are looking into this question. We do know that overall energy requirements of the brain decrease as you get older. And so one of the hypotheses is that perhaps as those energy requirements change, then we can see that over time symptoms change from childhood into adulthood, and perhaps the strategies that are needed can be changed as well. But certainly because Glut deficiency syndrome was only first discovered in the 1990s, we really are still learning about what that looks like over time in adults. So this is really kind of an emerging area, an emerging field. So it's exciting that a lot of researchers are very interested in this. We have some, it looks like some comments in the chat that folks were answering each other's questions. So that's fantastic. I think that's been taken care of. And one comment, I'm a music therapist, so I love seeing music for meals, hopefully evidence-based music intervention. So congratulations for that. That's wonderful. Lots of very nice comments as well. And then I'm curious about the music for fast eaters as well. Thank you, Janice. Oh, and actually there's a request for an email with the music links.
I think if you send me an email, anybody who's interested in getting some of the links, if you send me an email, I would be happy to send out an example of one of the our music for meals missives to you. I'm J Goldschmidt at css-md.org. J Goldschmidt at css-md.org, and I promise to respond.
And is the dietitian's programming options published?
You mean at CSS? I'm not quite sure what she means by dietetic program options. You mean, please clarify. I do present on our programming all the time. You'll find a lot of it in the book. There's a discussion of it as well, unless she means something else more specific.
Let me see if there's going to be any more comments about that, or if the person who made that comment wants to unmute, please feel free to do so.
My email, someone asked for it again. It's J Goldschmidt, Goldschmidt, J Goldschmidt at css-md.org. And if you type in Janice Goldschmidt, you probably come up in Google, but J Goldschmidt at css-md.org. And I promise to out to you.
And is there an interest group or organization where dietitians who are interested in IDD can connect and learn from one another and develop shared resources?
Yes, the most prominent is in the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, there are what are called dietetic practice groups. And one of them is called the Behavioral Health Nutrition Dietetics Practice Group. And one of the 4 areas covered under that is IDD. And we all sort of congregate in this BHN and share our ideas and programming and et cetera together.
Wonderful. And then there's also a comment. Also, maybe Courtney can create a dietitian nutrition group on the AADMD Mighty Network app for this purpose. Everyone should download the app and join. And
I can definitely do that. I'll do that today after this webinar.
Okay, and then I see some more comments here and the link. I don't want to be missing. I think the presentation is live, so there's one more question. Hi, Janice. Do you and your interns collect any data aside from BMI trends to monitor your progress or success with these programs and initiatives long term?
Yes, we do a lot of program evaluation. I just finished a major audit of the snacking program. We wanted to see not only how many servings of fruits and vegetables were going out, how many people were going out, and we also wanted to assess our costs. And again, that's where we found we had served almost 500 people in a week, and we had served 1,500 servings. We knew it was a lot. It was the first time we quantified it. And that's a serving, not a piece of carrot. It's a serving of carrots or celery or whatever, apples. We didn't break it down by type, but we did go through servings. We also looked at the cost and things like that. We do a lot of program evaluation with the meal kits as well. From a health metric, the primary one we're looking at is that BMI versus waist circumference, but other than program evaluation.
Wonderful, fantastic. I think we've addressed the questions that are in the chat. Are there any other questions we didn't get to talk about today?
So hello everybody, my name is Grant Turek. I've kind of helped in the background of putting this talk together. Dr. Cervenka, I've seen some other questions that I have written down from some other individuals, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So one from Elaine Palmer for Glenna and Macie. They specifically had a question, and I believe you referred to this briefly, but have you tried medium chain triglyceride oil supplements? And if so, what was your experience with those?
Yeah, so I didn't cover in any of the questions or previous information we shared, but there were, when we first came off the diet the first time, in the process of doing that, we tweaked and tinkered and tried all we could to do to really like squeeze every bit of benefit we could out of the diet. We changed hospitals and dietitians and to be able to have access to more tools, blood ketone monitoring. But one of the things we tried when we were doing all that was MCT oils. And we do feel like that they had a benefit for both ketone levels and for probably extra energy, and then maybe better symptom control too. And in fact, quite a few patients in the GLUT1 deficiency community do feel like MCT oils provide extra benefit. And there's some recent research too that it's quite possibly not just about ketone supplementation or boosting ketones, but could be something very completely different, working on mechanisms in the brain as well. So yeah, we are big fans of MCT oil in the GLUT1 community.
Awesome, thank you. Another question, kind of shifting back to Janice Goldschmidt, if you don't mind. Marcella Schaeflin asked, the meal kits and the menu are terrific, but what do you suggest for an adult who lives independently and chooses not to make it a priority to eat healthier?
Well, again, when you draw individuals into cooking, it really does change their relationship to food. And the best way to draw them in is things they like to have. So like if they only want to eat chicken nuggets and fries, then they start by making chicken nuggets and fries. I'll bring your attention to our website. We have a recipe, pictorial recipe collection there that is free. You can download any of them, hundreds there. And please go to the css-md.org. And those are really great starter recipes if you wanted to look for something to just get someone engaged in the cooking process, because they're so easy and they sort of reduce the anxiety when you have a picture recipe. So I would start them there. Another way is just get them more involved in menu planning if they're very resistant. Get them involved in the planning process.
And that was all the questions that I saw. Does anybody else have any other questions from the panelists, or somebody's asking for that website again? It's
css-md.org, and you'll look under, I believe it's the cooking tab, which makes sense. And then there's a tab that says recipe collection, and there's a lot in there. Feel free, it's all free, download, use as you see fit. It's a public service.
Oh, and I do see one more question. Janice, have you led in-person nutrition classes for individuals with IDD? Just wondering, in your experience, if you have found a most effective way to share nutrition information with this population in person.
Well, I really like to go with two things. One is food curiosity. So get them sort of an anthropological approach to food. Let's talk about the joy of food and how everybody's eating different things around us. We don't have to like it, but let's look at all the things people are eating. Just that interest, that curiosity about food, I think is a really important thing. The other nutritional angle I have, and this is for everybody, is don't go after the nutrition education like you need to eat, beta carotene. I go after patterns, like 5 fruits and vegetables a day, or eat your colors, or something like that, very generalized, because we don't tend to follow even when we know. We're all healthcare professionals here, and we know the logistics, and yet we still will go to Cheesecake Factory and order that appetizer, which has more calories than we need. So very general patterns I like to promote, and really just that love, that joy of the whole world of food. Let's get engaged in that so we can start to get curious about food and open ourselves up.
Awesome, thank you. Any questions from any of the other panelists before we kind of close out today's talk? Or anything else anybody would like to say?
I just wanted to say thank you to all of the group and everything. This has been absolutely terrific. Thank you again, Dr. Turek. And I saw that Dr. Keller has joined us as well for this opportunity. This has been really terrific. So thanks to the group and for our audience as well.
Thank you all.
Of course, thank you for everybody for coming to today. Thank you for being an attendee. Thank you for our panelists for taking the time out of your day, sharing your story and your experience. It was a wonderful webinar. And I'd also like to invite anybody that's still here to our next webinar in February, February 15th, we're going to have a special talk led by Dr. Christian Brandt about pharmacologic agents, including cannabinoids in the epilepsy and IDD population. So hopefully we can keep this momentum going and keep bringing you interesting topics about taking care of this population. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. I'm Seth Keller. I just want to say goodbye to everyone. And I'm one of the leaders and organizers with everyone on the call. And it's just a labor of love. And I can just sense it from everyone there. And great job. I mean, as a neurologist who puts out the fires, the epilepsy and less on wellness and health promotion and dietary kind of stuff, this is obviously so important. So again, thank you all so very much.